My wife Sigrid and I grew up in Transylvania. And very unique to Transylvania are the fortified churches. You have a church at the center, and then you have a fortress, a huge wall surrounding it. And some churches have a second wall just to keep people safe. And since these fortified churches are so unique, they have been added to the World Heritage Site, the United Nations. So we grew up in a city, Sigrid and I, in a little town, and you would have these churches right at the center of the village, at the center of the town. And why were they fortified? Well, there was a time years ago when the great Ottoman Empire, they were sweeping around Eastern Europe. So whenever they invaded, someone was on the steeple looking out when the people were in the fields or at home, and they could see from a distance the warriors coming on their horses, the Ottomans. They rang the bell. Everyone fled into the fortified churches. They closed up the door, and they were safe inside. To be safely in there, they had also stored their grains. They stored the bacon of their pigs, and they raised pigs because the Ottoman Muslims would not eat pork. So there are some tricks that came about. And they had a well right in the fortress, so they were safe in danger when attacked. We all need a safe place where we can be. Some people, I think what fortified church was way back then, you know of some people building bunkers for doomsday. It's kind of try to be safe. I understand our Psalms today in a metaphorical, in a new way, that safety is not so much found in a bunker, in a fortress, but in the living God and with us, with one another. What is a safe place? We all need a safe place, don't we? God is my refuge. God is my shelter. God is my safe place. And we are invited to trust, have each other's backs when we feel like, yeah, it's scary. And we heard several of the scary situations here from the children's message. And we all have situations in our lives that are just, whoa, scary, overwhelming when we face them. I remember just like yesterday, a young man in around mid-50s. He was brilliant, he was accomplished, he had climbed the career ladder, he was just wow. His mother died, and we met to prepare for the funeral. And this brilliant man, when I asked him and his sisters as we gathered and prepared the service, I asked him, what is it like for you to lose your mom? And he said, it's brutal. Brutal, literal words that he used. We've all experienced situations like brutal, where we felt like at a loss, where we did not know what is next. How can we face that? And our Psalms, both of the Psalms we've listened to, are an invitation to come to the living God. when we fall apart, when we feel like we can't hold it together anymore, when we feel like throwing our hands up, when we're overwhelmed, or when we feel abandoned and lost and lonely and feel like, I don't know how to make sense of this again. It's the invitation to draw close to God, God who is our refuge and our strength. And we find that refuge and strength when we're together with others facing our challenges, our situations, and the living God with us. I love the Lutheran motto, God's word, God's work, our hands. God's sheltering, God's protective love happens through our hands, through our hearts when we are holding each other. I remember Lorraine, way back, Lori. And she was so unique, her house was always open. If you needed a couch to crash on, well, you knew you would go to Lori's house. You could crash there. Her fridge was your fridge. If you needed some help, it was always an open door. Her house was always how she considered was God's house, in a sense like, it's not all mine, it's God's. I can share it. I open up. And there were many people who just, teenagers who just needed a break from home, just a place to land, to relax and to breathe through and to vent and whatever. So they knew they could go to Lori's house. Now, I could never live like that. But Lori, it was her gift to the community, her gift to those who were struggling, her home, her big heart. She had that heart, her home open for those who were struggling. That's how I imagine God's love, God's shelter, being in the temple of God, being at home with God happens when people open up and welcome us into their homes, into their hearts. And one of the most beautiful experiences to have is being held. I think when I just saw the baby, being held, there is something to me how a mother's and the dad's love holding the baby reflects most beautifully God's love, God's unconditional love, being held. And holding each other, physically hugging each other, cozying up on the couch under a blanket, being together in the nest, protecting each other. That's how God is present. That is how God is sheltering us through one another when we open our hearts, when we embrace each other, when we're with each other through the valley, through the storm, through the nightmares, through the thunders, whether they're literally or whether they're internal earthquakes that shake us and that move us. To me, Jesus embodies that sheltering, that protective love of God most beautifully. When Jesus says, "Come to me, all ye who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you peace. You can relax. When you worry, come." There is peace for our souls in our relationship with Jesus. That is the core meaning of sanctuary, what our congregation, what this sanctuary is to be about. You know, bird sanctuary, birds are safe there. Sanctuary here as a sacred place where we can just be safe, being real, being human, where we can tear up, where we can feel like it was a rough week. We feel like I couldn't get enough sleep because hell broke loose or whatever. We can come, we can be real, we can just be in the safety, in the shelter, in the presence of the living God. How does God shelter? How does God become a safe place for us? When God works through our hands, through our hearts, when we are holding each other, when we're creating a safe place for one another, that's how God is at work to shelter us, to carry us on eagle's wings, to nurture our souls, to refresh our spirits. How does God shelter through you?